In this desolate world, where everything is in ruins, food is hard to come by. However, the children in this bleak place are always searching for anything that might have even a little value because they can only get food if they have something valuable to trade. You see, there's this golem that roams the barren streets, and whenever kids stumble across this walking piece of stone, they always try to offer it something valuable. In return, the golem gives them food. This golem only appears in Sector 50, and nobody knows where it came from or who its owner is. However, it's not always guaranteed that the golem will accept just anything in exchange for food. It has to be something the golem finds valuable, which is why children often end up with nothing in return. Right now, a group of kids is frustrated because the golem just refused to take their flashlight, even though yesterday it accepted one. As angry as they are, they know better than to retaliate. There's always the risk that they might end up dead. There's a saying that golems have been seen entering the streets and killing people. Then there's this white-haired boy, Ray. The moment he spots the golem, he quickly steps in its path and offers everything valuable he's managed to gather. The golem takes note of the items and proceeds to grab the bag. And then, it flips the bag over into its mouth. Seeing the massive haul Ray just traded, all the onlookers are in awe. They have no idea how he managed to get his hands on so many valuable items. What makes it even more frustrating for them is that this isn't the first time Ray has pulled off a trade this big. Meanwhile, the golem starts dropping food supplies, and the amount Ray receives is enough to completely fill his backpack. The kids on the sidelines can't help but feel jealous and angry. It just doesn't make sense to them as to why does this one guy get so much food while they're left starving. At one point, some of them even consider stealing his supplies, but a few of them quickly shut that idea down. Apparently, Ray has a reputation. People call him the Ghost of 17th Street. As Ray walks from Sector 50 towards 17th Street, he suddenly senses the presence of people hiding in the shadows. His senses are so sharp that he can tell exactly how many there are. If he has to be precise, there are 7 people. So, he invites all these sneaky bastards to step out of hiding, especially since he already knows they've been following him for a while now. Enter this fat kid backed up by 6 others. The fatty doesn't forget to give props to our boy's sharp senses because they made sure to stay undetected while trailing him, yet they still got exposed. This fat kid is Ron. And this isn't the first time this fat sucker has pulled a stunt like this. Ray has already warned this shithead not to cross paths with him again. The last warning was crystal clear. If Ron ever showed his face like this again, he wouldn't be able to walk afterward. But Ron doesn't seem to care. Instead, he makes it clear that he's not going anywhere unless Ray hands over his supplies. Just put the fries in the bag, lil bro, or else. Fatty throws in a threat of his own, warning Ray that he won't be walking out of here safe and sound if he refuses. But my guy doesn't buy it for a second. If anyone's about to end up in bad shape, it sure as hell isn't him. Like I told you before, Ray has a reputation. He's the Ghost of 17th Street, a white ghost who moves without making a sound. And anyone who tries to mess with him are the ones who end up in the worst possible situation. But Fatty lets his ego get the best of him. He makes the big mistake of throwing a punch at Ray. But my guy barely even reacts. Just tilts his head slightly and dodges that punch like it's nobody's business. He then uses this brainless fool's own momentum against him, making him trip. But before Fatty can kiss the ground, my guy grabs him by the shirt, then delivers a devastating punch straight into his gut. That one blow is enough to leave this bastard mouth wide open, and he hits the ground like a sack of potatoes. Seeing their so-called boss get wrecked effortlessly, the rest of the group starts flinching in sheer panic. But since they can't just back off in a moment this critical, they make the foolish decision to charge straight at Ray. The first one swings a bat, but Ray ducks just in time, then counters with a brutal elbow smash that turns the guy's face into a bloody mess. He then further follows up, taking down the next 2 just as easily. 1 hit per person. That's all it takes. And just like that, all 6 of them are one with the ground. Ray then turns back to Ron, who, upon seeing his impending doom, is cowering in fear. My guy makes it very clear, just because Ron brought a few more ragtag idiots this time, the outcome was never going to change. As he walks towards the fatty, the sucker finds himself cornered. Ray is now gunning for this bastard's legs in order to keep his promise. He already warned Fatty that if he showed his face again, he wouldn't be able to walk ever again, and my guy plans to keep his word. On the other hand, Fatty pulls out a dagger from behind his back, trying to threaten Ray. His hands are shaking, slick with sweat as he warns Ray not to come any closer. He keeps calling Ray a monster, but deep down, he knows this dagger won't save his sorry ass. Speaking of monster, there's actually a backstory behind that title Ray's been given. You see, ever since he was a child, Ray was very different from others. Whenever he got severe injuries, there was never any expression on his face, and that made people wary of him. Kids his age were supposed to cry when they got hurt, but Ray stayed expressionless. Even in desperate, hopeless times when the other kids cried, Ray was the only one who never felt sorrow, hopelessness, remorse, or anger. Not once did a tear fall from his eyes. and eventually the other kids stopped associating with the weird kid who just didn't react like they did. His lack of emotions left him completely alone. Even Ray himself acknowledges how emotionless he is, and he never wanted to be like this. He always wished to be a normal person, just like any other kid. It had always been his desire to learn and experience this thing called emotion in his life. But even now, 6 years later, he still can't feel anything. However, what he can do is read other people's emotions. And right now, he can tell that Fatty is getting as desperate as he can possibly get. Ray reminds this coward that not using blades is an unspoken rule here. He questions this shithead. Did he bring that knife because he actually planned to stab him from the start? Of course, Fatty spins some bullshit about how he just picked it up from the garbage earlier. But my guy can see right through the lie. Ray doesn't need words to tell when someone is lying. He can tell just by looking at the color of the vessel inside their chest. You see, Ray has the ability to see a world others cannot. Every person has a small vessel within them, and whenever they feel emotions, certain colors of mana fill those vessels. Anger, hate, and love create red mana. Ridicule and apathy show up as blue mana. Joy and excitement result in yellow mana. And there are countless other colors as well, making Ray's world burst with shades that no one else can see. Meanwhile, the Fatty continues to issue threat after threat, trying to intimidate Ray. But it's clear that this bitch is too much of a coward to actually use the sharp dagger he's holding. Ray can see the deep black mana in the bastard's chest, which shows intense fear. With every step Ray takes toward him, the Fatty's fear only intensifies. But our boy, on the other hand, is ready to deliver the punishment this fat sucker truly deserves. A while later, Ray finally reaches his home. As soon as he enters the little tent where the others are staying, he's greeted by a bunch of kids who've been eagerly awaiting his return. The kid with green eyes is Pale, the leader of the underpass children. All the kids crowd around Ray, smiling and clinging to him in happiness, proud to have such a dependable brother. Later, as they sit together, he instructs everyone to show what supplies they've gathered so far. Each kid presents the food they managed to snag. Some have pieces of bubble gum, others have chocolate bars. But it's clear that this isn't nearly enough to feed all 7 people present. Naturally, everyone starts feeling anxious, unsure of how to proceed. This is then that Ray displays his haul, and seeing the copious amount of supplies Ray is having, all of the kids perk up in happiness. Some of the kids even start thinking that Ray must have stolen all of these supplies from the golem. Well, there's a reason why Ray is the only one who manages to bring back this much food every time he goes fishing. You see, the golem only takes magic items with residual mana. Since these kids can't see mana, they have no way of knowing which items are rich with it. So naturally, they end up with nothing from the golem. Now that they finally have enough food, Pale steps up to split it among everyone. Thanks to Ray, they'll actually get to fill their bellies before going to bed tonight. All the kids line up youngest to oldest. The first to receive their share is Josephine, the youngest among them. While the food is being shared, Ray quietly steps outside. He sits alone, deep in thought, reflecting on their miserable situation. No matter how hard they try, it's never enough. At the end of the day, there's always someone going to bed hungry. He thinks about making a trip to the warehouse, where he might be able to gather a big haul. He wants to support these kids no matter the cost. After all, he owes them his life. For a bit of context, let's flash back to a year ago, when Ray was buried in the snow, slowly freezing to death. It was these same kids who found him and pulled him out. At the time, Ray had already accepted death. He thought it was fine to just fade away in the cold. But these kids saved him unconditionally. They didn't expect anything in return. They didn't care about repayment. But Ray has a principle. He always pays his debts. Whether it's a favor or vengeance, he never leaves it unsettled. As he sits there lost in thought, Pale joins him, reminding him that he should get his share of food too. But Ray casually declines, claiming he isn't hungry. Unfortunately, his grumbling stomach betrays him. Without a word, Pale breaks his biscuit bar in half and hands one piece over to Ray. Just then, rain starts pouring, but it's not normal rain. The droplets are black. It seems to be a common occurrence in this desolate world. There are rumors that this black rain is the result of mages using too much magic. Apparently, mages live in the lower numbered sectors. Pale is convinced that the golem is something sent by a mage. But Ray isn't so sure. He thinks the golem might be a machine. Pale quickly disagrees. He's certain that magic is what keeps it moving. Well, Ray doesn't argue, because he's actually seen the golems using magic with his own eyes. Whenever a golem walks around, it sucks up mana from the surrounding atmosphere, drawing it into its core. That mana then mixes within and is expelled as a black gas. So there's a high chance that this gas is the cause of the black rain. Ray is convinced that there has to be a connection between the black rain and the black gas. That's when he suddenly remembers something important. Without another word, he pulls his hoodie up and tells Pale he's heading out for a bit. Naturally, Pale is against this idea. The rain is too heavy today, so much that even rivers are overflowing. But Ray doesn't care. He has to do what he has to do. And with that, he dashes off, leaving Pale sighing in frustration. Of course, Ray has a solid reason for doing this. You see, when it rains, everyone shelters inside their homes to avoid it. They believe that even a single drop of black rain touching you is enough to make you sick. However, Ray knows he can shield himself from the rain, making things easier for him. Once he reaches 18th Street, also known as Limpfoot Hector's Ration Warehouse, he sees the thugs inside having the time of their lives, playing and gambling. It's clear that Ray knew these idiots would be gambling on a rainy day, which is why he chose today to make his move. Since no one guards the warehouse on rainy days, it gives Ray the perfect opportunity to sneak inside. The place is completely dark, but Ray has a solution for that. Since the air is filled with an abundance of mana with hundreds of colors, Ray begins drawing in specific colors of mana, mixing them according to the right formula, and ignites fire in the palm of his hands. Although he doesn't know the exact principles of magic, he can use it just fine. Still, controlling red mana is a bit harder for some reason. With the light from the fire, Ray starts checking the supply boxes. As he goes through the supplies, a dagger suddenly whizzes by. It's so close it grazes his ear. It seems his presence has been noticed by the bastards inside, and they don't like the idea of some rat trying to steal their rations under their noses. Turns out, these bastards were hiding behind a pillar from the start, almost as if they were expecting Ray to show up. There are 3 of them in total, and they seem to know exactly where Ray is hiding. What's even more concerning for Ray is that he didn't expect these bastards to be equipped with night vision goggles. They throw their daggers again at Ray, but he dashes down, dodging them left and right. Seeing this, the goons with the night vision goggles are baffled. To think that a kid could dodge those daggers in this pitch-black place is just insane. The other goons berate their fellow to aim properly next time, but the poor guy gets rocked with a punch from Ray before he can even throw his dagger again. At this point, they're all bewildered at how this kid can see them in the dark. What they don't know is that Ray can easily see the color of their vessels. Right now, their vessels are glowing dark red because of the rage building inside them. One of them launches another dagger with all his strength, but Ray is already ready to dodge the oncoming strike. By reading the flow of mana from the vessel through the arteries, Ray can predict and easily dodge the blow. Once he dodges, he follows up with a kick to the guy's neck. With 2 of them down, only 1 remains, but the last one also gets a solid punch to his guts for his troubles, and that's how the 3 of these suckers end up face first on the ground. This is when another bastard barges into the warehouse. This one sounds trouble, because as far as Ray can recall, this guy is Humphrey, the Hector Group's executive. The bald bastard is disappointed to see all 3 of his men kissing the dirt, and what's really tweaking him out is the fact that they were wrecked by a rat. Even Ray doesn't want to mess with this guy, so he pulls his hoodie back over his face and decides it's time to get out of there. He quickly dashes and tries to strike the bastard across the chest to move him away from the entrance. But that punch Ray lands is barely more than a minor inconvenience to this bastard. In return, he tries to grab Ray by his head, but Ray ducks backward just in time, barely escaping. The bald bastard then follows up with a punch that sends Ray skidding across the floor. The bald bastard acknowledges that Ray indeed has some solid reflexes for a kid his age. Meanwhile, Ray internalizes that this guy is packing some serious power. The bald bastard starts throwing punch after punch, but Ray manages to dodge them all, moving left and right with ease. While Ray might be able to dodge, he knows he can't keep it up forever. He needs to figure out something before he gets knocked out. That's when he notices a gap in the bastard's defense, and quickly strikes his chest. As soon as his hand connects, he intensifies the fire in his palm, and that little moment of distraction is enough for Ray to vanish from the spot like he was never there. The other shitheads guarding the place quickly scatter around the warehouse, thinking that since that brat fought Humphrey, he won't be able to go far. Ray starts to feel concerned, because at this rate he's indeed going to get caught. But then he notices a stone and throws it to draw their attention away. Those goofy-ass shitheads take the bait and begin running in the opposite direction, while Ray makes his escape. He's finally succeeded in looting the infamous Hector Group's warehouse, but he knows he's dead if they catch him. Though Ray isn't afraid of dying, what he fears is that if he's not around, the kids won't last long in this unforgiving world. Suddenly, the bastards catch up to him, so Ray picks up his speed. But soon he finds himself facing a dead end. Now that he's cornered, the bastards pull out their weapons and tell him to come here and spit out what he stole before they start poking holes in his stomach. Since he doesn't see Humphrey around, Ray feels confident that he can win, so he starts charging some mana in his fists. One of the bastards charges at him, but Ray sidesteps and delivers a solid uppercut to the bastard. Then comes the other guy rushing, but Ray quickly grabs the bastard's dagger hand and produces some electricity, frying the bastard's head and leaving him down for the count. Suddenly, Ray hears more of these guys coming toward him. It looks like they won't stop pursuing him until he's caught, and Ray isn't sure if he can use his magic indefinitely. This is when he notices the garbage bin behind him and quickly takes refuge inside. The bastards also search the area, but they find no one other than a few of their companions, so they continue forward, determined to find him. They can't afford to lose him. With the rain pouring heavily, the footsteps start to fade, which means no matter what they do, Ray is confident they won't find him here. He decides to stay in the bin for the night because if they follow him to the bridge, the kids will be in danger as well. With that, he spends the entire night in that bin. The next day arrives, and he wakes up to the light seeping through the cracks. He hops out of the dustbin, but is immediately exposed by a bastard standing just outside the bin. Ray can tell just by the color of his vessel that this dude is absolutely angry, and our boy isn't sure if he can handle this bastard alone, given he hasn't fully recovered yet. The bastard finally lunges, trying to kill Ray. But that's when my guy also pulls a dagger of his own and swings it at the bastard. However, the bastard evades the attack and swings back at his opponent. While attempting to dodge the attack, Ray loses his balance and trips. This gives that bastard the perfect opportunity to deliver the final blow, but just before the shiny dagger reaches Ray's eye socket, someone shoots the bastard down, killing him on the spot. The bastard behind the trigger is another sassy guy who seems to already know about Ray. This guy is black-haired Niles, the 17th Street boss. He can't help but warn Ray about the dangerously close call he just had. If the gunshot was even delayed for a second, Ray would have been pushing up daisies. Ray, in response, questions him why he is here, since Niles is usually not awake this early. To which Niles says yes. He claims to have heard rumors that Hector's guys were on the prowl. He then notices the canned food Ray is hiding under his hoodie and is sure that Ray must have swiped the haul under Hector's nose. For that, he can't help but call out our boy for his bold move. Ray in return reciprocates with a thanks, but Niles clarifies that it wasn't a compliment, so there's nothing to feel proud of. Internally, Ray is unsure how to handle Niles. Because people like Niles have emotions so monotonous that their vessels never really fill up, so he can't tell what this dude is even thinking. Niles, on the other hand, warns him to be careful, or else he'll die if he continues pulling stunts like this. There are people he should not be mingling with, and Ray should know better. But for our boy, endangering his life is still better than starving to death. Well, Niles has no room to argue about that, so he just reminds Ray that they're both equal now. Ray saved him once, and Niles in return saved Ray. But Ray claims that he never intended to save him. Ray merely mistook Niles for supplies when he was floating down the river. But still though, the Blackhead still can't deny the fact that he ended up living because of this little brat. Still, as far as Ray remembers, he's already been repaid for the favor. In order to provide some context for what they're talking about, we transition a year back in time. There, Ray happened to pull Niles out of the river. Apparently, Niles used to be an executive of the 46th sector, but he was betrayed. Or at least, that's what Niles claims to have happened. Though Ray is sure it's not a lie, especially since Niles was the one who taught him lessons as a repayment for saving his life. This is when Ray brings up the important question. He asks Niles if he can join an organization. If he has to be specific, he wants to join Niles' organization. The only reason Ray wants to join the organization is to keep those kids safe. Niles does not give any immediate response. He just walks away from the scene and stands behind a wall. He then asks an unexpected question, asking Ray if he can use magic. Ray is shocked and questions him how he knows this much. To which Niles does not respond outwardly, but inwardly, he's very intrigued to realize his hunch is right on the money. Initially, he had seen Ray lighting up a fire without a lighter. Ray, on the other hand, continues to question him about how he knew he could use magic. Niles finally speaks, claiming that one fellow magician had told him that there is mana in the air, which is used for magic, and that there are only a handful of people who can detect and use mana. Ray then asks him if his fellow magician also mentioned something about colors, to which Niles does not remember any mention of colors, but his fellow magician did claim that mana is invisible and cannot be seen with the naked eye. This sparks Ray's curiosity even more, because he can clearly see these different types of colors in the air. Ray questions him once again, asking if he might be forgetting some crucial detail, but this only agitates Niles, as he believes he has already told Ray everything he knows, and at this point, Ray is just trying to push his buttons by asking the same thing over and over. Back to the topic at hand. Ray wants to know if his request to join the organization will be approved or not, to which Niles declines his request for some obvious reasons. When Ray inquires about the reason behind this blunt rejection, Niles once again gives Ray the silent treatment. In order to learn the real reason behind Niles' hesitation to take Ray into the organization, here's a bit of background. You see, all the sectors are along the Elton River. If you go up to the river, you'll arrive at other sectors, and you could probably escape the slums and find a better life there. So, Niles believes that it would be too much of a waste for a kid with such abilities to die here. Well, we now know the reason behind Niles' rejection, though he does not say this out loud to Ray. Instead, he simply asks Ray if the thought of leaving the 50th sector has ever crossed his mind. He even offers to help find him a car if he plans to leave this place. Ray, however, simply declines the proposition as he has kids to take care of. But Niles assures him that he is already planning to open an orphanage here, so Ray can leave the kids in his capable hands. He promises to give a better life and make sure they are not dying in the streets. Meanwhile, Ray can't figure out if this guy is bluffing or telling the truth, especially since his vessel color doesn't change at all. Though Ray is not doubting Niles, especially since this guy has always kept his word. Ray then warns Niles about Hector's group, because those guys seem to be preparing to start a war. Ray knows this for a fact because he had seen them receive truckloads of weapons, but it looks like Niles knew about this already. Not to mention, the fact that he just killed one of their guys is a definite declaration of war. Ray reminds him that the people in the stores will suffer if he loses the war. Suddenly, Niles' driver calls him out, reminding him that they should be leaving now. With that, as Niles makes his way inside the car, he reveals to Ray that it's going to be a war zone here, so Ray better find another hideout if he can. Before leaving, he throws this little potion bottle to our boy and tells him to heal his injured ear with this. With that, he leaves the place in his car. We then get back to 17th Street near Central Square, where we meet one of the kids from the Underpass Children's Group. The kid gets excited to see Ray finally back, but his happiness quickly morphs into worries when he notices Ray injured. But Ray quickly tries to assure the sobbing kid that he just fell, nothing else. While the poor kid wipes his tears off while feeling relieved and happy that he was not into fights, Ray notices this whirlwind of emotions inside this kid. To think that a single person can feel so many emotions at once is something that never fails to fascinate him. He then hands over all of the canned food to the kids and tells her to head to the tent first and also inform Pale that he will be back soon. By the way, this kid's name is Josephine. While the kid walks his own path, Ray turns to the old woman, Viola, and asks her if she told Josephine anything. Apparently, this old woman is blind, which explains why she didn't react when Ray appeared in the scene. She is a storyteller. She responds to Ray's question by answering that she was just telling her about the rainbows. Ray gently cautions the old woman to perhaps not always tell the kids these fantastical stories, because he doesn't want them to develop feelings of inadequacy, and it could make them less content with the streets they are currently living in. But Viola believes that children should be encouraged to imagine and dream beyond their immediate surroundings. Ray takes note of the color of her vessel, and it appears to be purple. But he is not sure what feeling this purple color might represent, because he has never seen this color in anyone else besides Viola. Ray then warns her about the impending conflict that is looming on the horizon, and advises her to consider moving to another street before things escalate. After this little exchange, our boy walks away, while Viola can't help but to notice how considerate Ray is for a child. The next morning, our boy runs some errands as a delivery boy. When the shop owner opens the gate, he is surprised to see Ray in front of him, since he was expecting Ron to show up with deliveries. While my guy pretends not to know, deep down in his mind, he can't help but to think how that unfortunate fatty got both his legs broken, so he is essentially a helpless person. Ray then politely inquires the shopkeeper if he is not planning to evacuate, as there won't be any customers if a conflict arises. But the shop owner claims that he has nothing other than this store, and as for the war, he is quite certain that it's not going to happen. Hearing this, Ray gets intrigued and inquires about the reasoning, to which the shop owner explains that Hector's group and Niles are currently in discussion, so if things are resolved peacefully, there won't be a conflict. Right at that moment, the gate of the room where the meeting was going on opens up, and we see a group of men from Hector's group. The man with scars all over his face is actually the leader of 18th Street, whose name is Hector, the leader of the Hector's group. My guy quickly pulls his hoodie over his face. Hector, on the other hand, is intrigued by the fact that a child is working in this place while all the adults have fled. He then places his hand over Ray's neck as a gesture of appreciation for the hard work Ray is putting in. He then further gives the little one some coins and tells him to treat himself well. With that, they proceed to leave. But it is then that the bald man Humphrey notices Ray's injured ears, so he quickly turns towards our boy. It doesn't take long for Ray to sense the shift in the atmosphere, so he quickly hides his ear because he knows he has been recognized. But before the bald man can react, his boss calls out to him, telling him to stop standing there idly. Eventually, they all leave the place in their nice car. Meanwhile, Ray knows that Humphrey had recognized the wound on his ear, but he is not sure why that man left without saying anything. Ray and that shop owner then hurry to Niles to inquire about the outcome of the negotiations. And sadly enough, the only thing Niles has to say is that the negotiations failed. So the conflict is inevitable. The shop owner is dismayed to hear this news. Niles then elaborates that the terms Hector was demanding were simply unreasonable. He basically wanted Niles' entire organization to submit to his control, which is even worse than engaging in a conflict with those men. He then apologizes to both the shop owner and Ray and advises them to remain cautious and stay in the hideout. After leaving the shop, Ray walks alone through the streets, As he does, he reflects how difficult it would be to navigate the streets if the conflict were to break out. In order to prepare for the impending crisis, he decides to gather as much food as possible beforehand. Suddenly, he notices Humphrey in the car, which Ray finds very suspicious because he had never seen a car like his in Sector 50, so he decides to investigate. Later, we find ourselves at the entrance to Hector's group on 18th Street. The big boss himself, Hector, is acting as nothing more than a subordinate in the presence of this man who emerges from the car. The man's presence is commanding, and it's still unknown who this figure actually is. The monocle over his left eye only makes him even more stand out. Even Ray doesn't seem to recognize this man. He then takes note of this man's vessel's color, which is dark blue, and calling it black wouldn't be incorrect either. That color resembles the mana of golems when they move. Also, he is curious about the rings around this man's vessel. Not only that, there is a significant amount of mana surrounding the rings as well, and it's as if he is using those rings to contain the mana from escaping. He is certain that that man is dangerous, and he needs to inform Niels about it. The scene transitions to 17th Street, Niels' group, where we can see that Niels' men are also preparing for the impending battle. Ray also arrives there and startles this guard by appearing out of the blue, because he is unsure how Ray even got inside the base. To which Ray states that the gate was open. He then inquires about the whereabouts of Niels, to which the man explains that his boss went out to prepare for the war, and it's dangerous, so Ray should also be leaving as well. Since Niels is not here, Ray decides to simply convey his message through this guard, but he is unsure how to explain to this guard that those guys have a magic user in their ranks. So, he simply tells the guard to relay the message to Niels that he should be wary of the man with a monocle. Later, Ray returns to the kids in the tent, but Ray sits outside accompanied by Pale. Pale questions him about his opinion regarding who is going to emerge victorious in this conflict. Well, Ray is uncertain about which side to support, especially since both groups seem to be evenly matched. Personally, Ray is rooting for Niels, because he believes it's the only way the safety of the children can be assured. If Hector wins this war, the street children will be sold into slavery. Suddenly, they hear a terrifying noise, which puts Ray on high alert. The scene then quickly shifts to 17th Street, where Niels' soldiers are trying their best to fight off against these golems, but all of that barrage of bullets has no effect on these creatures. In retaliation, the creature unleashes a massive amount of dark blue magical energy that decimates everything in its path. And as if that is not enough, the golem dispatches those men with his bare hands like they were mere tomatoes. The one manipulating those golems is, of course, this monocle-wearing bastard. He is feeling very pleased with his creations, and further commands them to eliminate everything here. We then transition back under the bridge where the kids live. While Ray is planning to join the fray, Pale quickly grabs him by the hand and stops him from going. As they are arguing about who should go and assess the situation, their skirmish ends up waking Josephine up. But Pale quickly tells her that they will be back soon enough, so she should go back inside the tent and have some sleep. Finally, Pale concedes to our boy's insistence. He decides to stay with the children here, while he gives Ray the green light to venture further. He also tells him not to go too far and to return as soon as he figures out what is happening. After promising to return as soon as possible, Ray finally reaches the scene, and everything is in a state of chaos. The aftermath of the battle is brutal. Everything is engulfed in flames, and the soldiers are scattered around with missing limbs. The one red-haired soldier we had seen before still seems to be alive. He reveals to our boy that those bastards had brought golems with them, and the man with the monocle was controlling them. He then warns our boy to flee before his life is extinguished. He dies on the spot, as he is also torn apart into two equal pieces. It breaks Ray's heart to witness this unnecessary bloodshed. He closes the poor soldier's eyes, grabs the dagger from the ground, and decides to proceed. He is certain that the way things are going, Niels is bound to lose, so he wants to assist him in any way he can. While Ray is occupied, we shift back to the bridge at the same time, where all the children live. Well, it appears that not even the children were spared. They have been brutally slaughtered, and only Pale remains, holding Josephine in his arms. The one behind all this bloodshed is one of the golems we had seen before. The soulless bastard begins to coalesce this dark blue energy in the palm of his hand to unleash it upon Pale, while Pale, on the other hand, sheds his last remaining tears as he wishes for Ray not to return. The 17th Street of Central Plaza had just gone up in flames. The man had arrived exclusively late to the horrific scene. All he could see were the corpses of Niles' underlings, but strangely, his own corpse was nowhere to be found, indicating that he was still alive. A loud rumbling took his attention from behind. Ray turned around quickly, realizing the direction it came from. Understanding that, he ran towards the tent. When he got here, panting and exhausted from all the running, it was yet another dreadful sight. He witnessed the remains of someone right up ahead of the golem monster. Filled with rage, Ray moved to attack this monster with his flaming sword. But the monster quickly turned back with its sharp senses and executed a heavy gut punch against the boy's stomach. Bro came at him with a full Mike Tyson swing. Anyway, Ray felt immense pain as he crashed into a wall. On the brink of defeat, he doesn't want to give up and hopes to assure his loved ones are all safe. It was at this moment that a voice called out in his mind. He relived the memories of the children, the people who adored him every time he came back. It empowered him for a moment, before those mellow memories became a terrifying nightmare. All of those children had been brutally murdered. Lorraine, Leia, Corden, Miles, Josephine, and Pale were all gone. Ray pitifully denied the reality, reaching out for them. He can't accept the loss of their lives without having to repay them for their kindness. But it matters very little since the silver-haired boy is about to meet his own end here. He hears a familiar sound, the same sound that he heard during a fight. This was the bastard golem who became responsible for ending their lives. And now, it is preparing a blast to end Ray too. These helpless children as well as Niles' men, and even the people in the street. The bloodbath that followed was all because of this monster. Ray took it upon himself to exact revenge no matter the cost. He uses every fiber of his being, every last bit of his energy, pooling it together until he has enough to stand. But Ray's body didn't obey until a powerful car was chucked at the golem from out of nowhere, sending it crashing away. From inside the vehicle comes out Niles, who rescues Ray. Thankfully, the kid hasn't received any major injuries, but the boy is dreadful and discouraged to share the news of the deceased children. Niles horrifically turns and realizes what went down. He apologizes to the child for being too late to the scene. Ray doesn't want to accept it as his fault. Niles, realizing that the boy is deeply grieving and blaming himself for their lives, hugs him for comfort. As for his subordinates, they're all dead. The one responsible is definitely Hector, who called mages from the outside to kill them all. The question is, what's he going to do now?